In the misty village of St. Mary's Mead, a brilliant artist lies dead, poisoned in his studio. His final masterpiece, a scandalous portrait, stolen. Hercule Poirot, with his razor-sharp mind, unravels a web of secrets woven by a beautiful model, a proud patron, and a venomous critic. As village whispers reveal hidden truths, one question burns: who killed Julien Dubois to bury the painting's deadly secret? Step into a mystery where every brushstroke hides a lie, and only Poirot can unveil the truth. Chapter 1. The Studio of Shadows. The autumn mist clung to the cobbled lanes of St. Mary's Mead, softening the edges of the village's ancient stone cottages. It was a morning of deceptive tranquility, broken by a sharp cry from the studio of Monsieur Julien Dubois, an artist whose name had become synonymous with portraits that captured not merely likeness, but the very soul of their subjects. Hercule Poirot, who had arrived only the previous evening to visit his old friend Miss Jane Marple, found himself summoned before breakfast by Constable Hargreaves, a man whose ruddy face betrayed both urgency and unease. Monsieur Poirot, Hargreaves began, twisting his helmet in his hands. It's a bad business. Dubois is dead, and his latest painting gone. We need your expertise, sir, if you'd be so kind. Poirot, adjusting his impeccable pinstriped suit, raised an eyebrow. Dead, you say, and a painting missing. This is most intriguing. Lead on, Constable. The studio, perched at the edge of the village near a copse of elms, was a converted barn, its weathered beams draped in ivy. Inside, chaos reigned. Canvases leaned haphazardly against walls, their vibrant hues muted by the grey light filtering through a skylight. Brushes lay scattered like fallen soldiers, and the air was thick with the mingled scents of oil paint and turpentine. At the centre of this disarray sat Julien Dubois, slumped in a velvet-upholstered chair, his once vivid eyes now dull, his lips frozen in a grimace of pain. A wineglass, its contents spilled in a crimson arc across the easel, before him, glinted in the dimness. Poirot's gaze swept the room with the precision of a metronome. The easel, bare of canvas, stood as a silent accusation. This portrait, he murmured, his Belgian accent crisp, it was of great significance. Nan, else why remove it? He knelt beside the body, noting the faint bitter scent of almonds emanating from the glass. Cyanide, perhaps, he said softly, his moustache twitching. A poison most deliberate. Constable Hargreaves, hovering nervously, recounted the morning's events. A neighbour, Mrs. Pritchard, had heard a cry at dawn and, finding the studio door ajar, discovered Dubois. The missing portrait, she claimed, was the talk of the villager. Work Dubois had boasted would shake the foundations of St. Mary's Mead. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A painting that shakes foundations, he said, is not merely art, it is a weapon. He moved to the easel, examining its empty frame. A faint scratch on the wood suggested a canvas had been hastily removed, perhaps cut from its stretcher. Nearby, a palette knife lay abandoned, its blade smeared with crimson paint that matched no visible canvas. Poirot's fingers traced the air, as if reconstructing the scene. The artist was interrupted, he said. He drank, he painted, and then Le Fin. But why take the portrait and leave all else? Hargreaves coughed. There's talk of 3 visitors last night, sir. Mademoiselle Claire Beaumont, the artist's model, Sir Reginald Harrow, who paid for the painting, and Mr. Victor Crane, that critic from London. Each was seen near the studio after dusk. Poirot nodded, his mind already weaving a tapestry of motives. Then we must speak with them, Constable. For where there is a missing masterpiece, there is a secret worth killing for. As they left the studio, Poirot paused at the threshold, glancing back at the desolate scene, the spilled wine, the empty easel, the lifeless artist. They formed a puzzle that demanded his little grey cells. "This is not merely murder," he said to Hargreaves, his voice low. "It is a performance, and the portrait is the script. We shall find it, and with it, the truth." Chapter 2. The Three Suspects. The village inn of St. Mary's Mead, with its low-beamed ceiling and crackling hearth, offered a stark contrast to the grim scene at Julien Dubois' studio. The Rose and Crown, as it was called, exuded a homely warmth, its walls adorned with faded watercolours of the surrounding countryside. Yet, as Hercule Poirot entered the private parlour reserved for his inquiry, the air seemed to thicken with the weight of unspoken secrets. Miss Jane Marple, invited to observe, sat unobtrusively in a corner, her knitting needles clicking softly, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Constable Hargreaves, still clutching his helmet, stood by the door, his presence more ceremonial than authoritative. Poirot, with his characteristic fastidiousness, adjusted the cuffs of his immaculate suit and surveyed the three individuals seated before him. They were, as Hargreaves had indicated, the last known visitors to Dubois' studio on the evening of his death. Each face told a story, and Poirot, with his keen understanding of human nature, intended to read them all. First was Mademoiselle Claire Beaumont, a woman whose beauty was as arresting as it was unsettling. Her raven hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her emerald green dress clung to her form with a quiet sophistication. Yet her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, betrayed a nervousness that her serene expression could not mask. Her eyes, a deep hazel, flickered with something akin to fear, or was it guilt? Whenever they met Poirot's gaze, next sat Sir Reginald Harrow, a man whose presence filled the room with the weight of his status. His tailored morning coat and polished boots spoke of wealth, while his silver hair and stern jaw suggested a life accustomed to command. Yet there was a rigidity to his posture, a tension in the way he gripped the arm of his chair that hinted at a man guarding a secret. His blue eyes, cold as winter frost, avoided the others, focusing instead on the window as if seeking escape in the mist-shrouded fields beyond. Lastly, Mr. Victor Crane, the art critic, lounged with an air of calculated nonchalance. His thin frame was clad in a slightly rumpled suit, and his sharp, hawk-like features were accentuated by a sardonic smile. His fingers toyed with a cigarette case, though he made no move to light one, perhaps sensing Poirot's distaste for such habits. Crane's reputation preceded him. His reviews, published in London's most prestigious journals, could elevate an artist to fame or consign them to obscurity. His recent critiques of Dubois had been particularly venomous, and yet he sat now, with an air of amusement, as if the proceedings were merely a diverting game. Poirot cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his Belgian accent lending a musical cadence to his words, "we are gathered to discuss a most tragic event, the death of Monsieur Julien Dubois and the disappearance of his final masterpiece. Each of you, I am informed, visited his studio last evening. I ask you now to recount your movements with precision, for the truth lies in the details." He turned first to Claire Beaumont, his eyes softening but never losing their sharpness. "Mademoiselle, you were Monsieur Dubois' model, were you not? Tell me, what brought you to his studio last night?" Claire's fingers tightened around a lace handkerchief, and she hesitated before speaking. Her voice, when it came, was low, and measured with a faint tremor. "I was Julien's model," Yes, for many of his portraits. Last night, I went to discuss his latest work. He had been so secretive about it, working late into the night, refusing to let me see it until it was complete. I wanted to know why, and— "Did you see this portrait?" Poirot asked, leaning forward slightly. She shook her head, her eyes dropping to the floor. "No, he was still painting when I arrived, around 7 o'clock. The canvas was covered, and he was agitated. He said it wasn't ready, that it would change everything. I left soon after, perhaps half an hour later. He was alive. When I left Monsieur Poirot, I swear it." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And what was the nature of your relationship with Monsieur Dubois?" "An artist and his model, they share a certain intimacy, Nan." Claire's cheeks flushed, but her voice remained steady. "Julian was a friend, nothing more. He saw me as his muse, but there was no impropriety. He was consumed by his work, always." Miss Marple's needles paused for a fraction of a second, and Poirot caught the subtle glance she cast toward Claire. He made a mental note. The model's denial was too emphatic, her composure too carefully maintained. There was more to her story, he was certain. Turning to Sir Reginald Harrow, Poirot adopted a more formal tone. "Sir Reginald, you commissioned this mysterious portrait, did you not? What was its subject, and why did you visit the studio last evening?" Harrow's jaw tightened, and he spoke with the measured precision of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "The portrait was to be a tribute to my family, Monsieur Poirot, a depiction of our legacy, to hang in Harrow Hall. I visited Dubois to discuss its progress and to settle the final payment. I arrived shortly after 8, found him in good spirits, and left within the hour. The portrait was still on the easel, covered, as Mademoiselle Beaumont described. I did not see it." Poirot's moustache twitched. "And yet, Sir Reginald, a painting of such importance is now missing. Did you sense any unease in Monsieur Dubois, any hint of danger?" Harrow's eyes narrowed. He was his usual self, obsessed with his work, perhaps a little distracted. "I saw no cause for alarm. As for the painting, I am as baffled as you. It was to be my pride, not a source of scandal." The word scandal hung in the air, and Poirot noted the slight stiffening of Claire's posture, the quick glance Crane shot toward Harrow. There was a thread here, delicate but tangible, connecting these three. He would tug at it carefully. Finally, Poirot turned to Victor Crane, who met his gaze with a smirk that bordered on insolence. "Monsieur Crane, your reviews of Monsieur Dubois were, shall we say, less than kind. Yet you visited him last night. Why?" Crane leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. "Curiosity, Monsieur Poirot. Dubois claimed this new work would silence his detractors, myself included. I went to see if his boasts held water. I arrived around 9, found him drinking wine and muttering about his masterpiece. The canvas was covered, and he refused to show it. I left him to his delusions, and returned to my lodgings." "And his mood?" Poirot pressed. "Was he fearful, angry?" Crane shrugged. "He was drunk, or near enough. Excitable, as artists often are. I saw no signs of impending doom, if that's what you mean." Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. 3 visitors, 3 accounts, and yet the portrait vanishes, and Monsieur Dubois lies dead. The poison, it was in the wine, I suspect cyanide, from the scent of almonds. Did any of you see him drink, or offer him a glass?" All 3 shook their heads, their denials swift and unanimous. Poirot smiled faintly, a smile that did not reach his eyes. Very well, but know this. The truth, it hides in the shadows of your words. I, Hercule Poirot, will bring it into the light. As the suspects rose to leave, Miss Marple spoke for the first time, her voice gentle but piercing. Monsieur Poirot, might I suggest a walk? The village air often clears the mind. Poirot inclined his head, sensing her intent. They stepped outside, the mist curling around them like a living thing. As they strolled toward the village green, Miss Marple spoke softly. They are all hiding something, Monsieur Poirot. Claire's fear is not merely for herself, I think. Sir Reginald's pride is a shield, and Mr. Crane's scorn masks a deeper wound. The portrait, I suspect, was more than art, it was a revelation. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. You are perceptive, Mademoiselle Marple. The portrait was a mirror reflecting truths they wished to conceal, but whose truth was so dangerous that it demanded murder. They paused by the churchyard where the gravestones stood like silent sentinels. Poirot's eyes scanned the horizon, as if the mist itself might yield answers. We must learn more of this portrait, he said, its subject, its power, and we must watch these three, for one of them holds the key to both the painting and the poison. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, a soft counterpoint to the weight of their task. The village will talk, Monsieur Poirot. It always does, and in its whispers we may find the truth. As they returned to the inn, Poirot's mind was already at work, piecing together the fragments of the evening's revelations. Claire's nervousness, Harrow's guarded pride, Crane's calculated indifference, each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete. The portrait, he knew, was the heart of the mystery. Its absence was not merely a theft, it was a deliberate act to bury a secret, and Poirot, with his little grey cells, would uncover it. No matter how deeply it was hidden, the parlour, now empty save for the lingering scent of Claire's perfume and Crane's cigarette smoke, seemed to echo with the weight of their lies. Poirot sat, his eyes half closed, reconstructing the scene in his mind. The studio, the wine, the easel, the missing canvas all pointed to a crime of passion, of desperation. But whose passion, whose desperation? The answer, he felt, lay not in what was said, but in what was left unsaid. He rose, his resolve firm. The game, it has begun, he murmured, and Hercule Poirot does not lose. Chapter 3. The model's secret. The morning sun struggled through the mist that clung to St. Mary's Mead, casting a pale glow over the village's thatched roofs and winding lanes. Hercule Poirot, ever immaculate in his polished shoes and neatly pressed suit, sat in the Rose and Crown's private parlour, a cup of tisane steaming before him. Across from him, Mademoiselle Claire Beaumont perched on the edge of a chintz-covered chair, her delicate hands twisting a silk scarf with a rhythm that betrayed her unease. Miss Jane Marple, invited once more to observe, occupied a corner with her knitting, her presence as unobtrusive as a shadow, yet as perceptive as a hawk. Poirot had requested this private interview with Claire, sensing that her nervous demeanour during the previous days' questioning concealed a truth that might illuminate the mystery of Julien Dubourg's death and the vanished portrait. The parlour, with its polished oak table and faded floral curtains, offered a quiet intimacy, a stage for truths to emerge or to be skillfully hidden. Mademoiselle Beaumont Poirot began, his voice smooth yet probing. Yesterday you spoke of visiting Monsieur Dubois to discuss his latest work. You said he was secretive, agitated, but there is more, n'est-ce pas? A model and her artists, they share a bond, a confidence. What did you fear in that studio? Claire's hazel eyes darted to the window, as if seeking refuge in the mist beyond. She drew a breath, steadying herself. Monsieur Poirot, I told you the truth. Julien was consumed by his work. He spoke of the portrait as if it were dangerous. He said it would reveal too much. I went to understand what he meant, but he wouldn't show me the canvas. It was covered, always covered. Poirot leaned forward, his moustache quivering slightly. And yet, mademoiselle, your hands tremble. Your eyes avoid mine. There is something you saw or suspected that weighs upon you. Tell me, what was the nature of this portrait? Was it of you, perhaps? Her cheeks flushed, a delicate pink that contrasted with the pallor of her face. I don't know. Julien often painted me, but this time he was different, distant, almost afraid. He said the portrait wasn't just for Sir Reginald, that it would shake the foundations of more than one house. I thought he was exaggerating, as artists do, but now... Her voice faltered, and she pressed the scarf to her lips. Miss Marple's needles paused, a subtle signal that Poirot did not miss. He nodded encouragingly. Continue, mademoiselle. What did you fear it revealed? Claire hesitated, her gaze flickering toward the door as if expecting an interruption. There were rumors, she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. In the village, they talk. About me, about Sir Reginald. People saw me at Harrow Hall, late at night. They assume things that aren't true. Julianne knew. The gossip, I thought perhaps the portrait, showed something scandalous, but I never saw it, I swear. Poirot's eyes narrowed, though his tone remained gentle. And these visits to Harrow Hall, they were innocent, you say? She nodded vigorously. Sir Reginald is a patron of the arts. He invited me to discuss Julian's work, to see his collection. Nothing more. But Julien, he was jealous, I think, not of me, but of Sir Reginald's influence. He thought Sir Reginald wanted to control his art. Poirot steepled his fingers, his mind cataloguing her words. Jealousy, influence, scandal, the threads were forming, but the pattern remained elusive. When you left the studio, mademoiselle, was Monsieur Dubois alone? Did you see anyone else nearby? Claire shook her head. No one. It was dusk, the village quiet. I left around 7:30, and Julien was still at his easel, muttering to himself. He was alive, Monsieur Poirot. I couldn't. Her voice broke, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. Poirot observed her closely, noting the genuine distress, but also the careful choice of words. She was withholding something. He was certain, not a lie, but a half-truth veiled by fear or loyalty. Very well, he said, rising. You have been most helpful, mademoiselle, but know this, the truth, it cannot remain hidden. It is like a painting, it reveals itself in time. As Claire departed, her footsteps soft on the inn's creaking floorboards, Miss Marple set her knitting aside and met Poirot's gaze. She's frightened, Monsieur Poirot, she said quietly. Not just of the murder, but of what that portrait might have shown. A woman like Claire Beaumont, she knows. Her beauty is both a gift and a danger. The village talks, and talk can ruin. Poirot nodded, adjusting his cufflinks with a thoughtful air. You are right, Mademoiselle Marple. The portrait, it was a mirror, reflecting a truth that someone wished to destroy. But was it Claire's secret or another's? And why did she look to Sir Reginald yesterday, as if seeking his protection? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with a knowing glint. The village has eyes, Monsieur Poirot, Mrs. Pritchard, the baker's wife. mentioned seeing Claire leave Harrow Hall at midnight more than once. And Sir Reginald's wife, Lady Harrowshe's been absent these past months, visiting her sister in Bath. It makes one wonder what truths Julien Dubois chose to paint. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. You are a treasure, Mademoiselle Marple. The gossip of St. Mary's Mead is as valuable as any clue in the studio. We must learn more of these visits to Harrow Hall and what Sir Reginald feared. From that portrait, he paced the parlour, his polished shoes silent on the rug. The pieces were falling into place, but the puzzle was far from complete. Claire's fear, her connection to Sir Reginald, the mysterious portrait, these were not mere coincidences. The cyanide in the wine suggested premeditation, a calculated act to silence Dubois. But was Claire a victim of circumstance, or a player in a deeper game? Tonight, Poirot declared, we shall dine at the inn and observe our suspects. The human heart, it reveals itself in unguarded moments. And I, Hercule Poirot, shall be watching. As the mist thickened outside, cloaking St. Mary's Mead in a shroud of secrecy, Poirot felt the thrill of the chase. The model's secret was but one thread in the tapestry of this crime. He would unravel it, stitch by stitch, until the truth stood bare before him. Chapter 4. The Patron's Pride. The evening settled over St. Mary's Mead with a quiet dignity, the mist parting to reveal a sky pricked with early stars. Inside the Rose and Crown, the dining room glowed with the soft flicker of candlelight. Its long oak table set for a modest yet elegant supper. Hercule Poirot, his bow tie perfectly aligned, had orchestrated this gathering with a purpose: to observe Sir Reginald Harrow in the company of Claire Beaumont and Victor Crane, where the unguarded moments of conversation might betray what formal questioning concealed. Miss Jane Marple, ever the silent sentinel, sat at the far end, her presence unassuming, her knitting a subtle mask for her keen observation. Sir Reginald Harrow dominated the room, not by volume but by the sheer weight of his presence. His silver hair gleamed under the chandelier, and his deep voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to deference. Yet, as Poirot watched him over the rim of his wine-glass, filled with a carefully inspected claret, there was a brittleness to Harrow's composure, a tightness in his smile that suggested a man standing on the edge of a precipice. Monsieur Poirot, Harrow began, slicing into his roast pheasant with deliberate precision, I trust your investigation progresses. This tragedy has cast a shadow over St. Mary's Mead, and I, for one, wish to see it lifted. Poirot inclined his head, his eyes never leaving Harrow's face. The shadow, Sir Reginald, is cast by the absence of the portrait. You commissioned it, did you not? A work to immortalize the Harrow legacy. Tell me what was to be its subject. Harrow. Falk paused mid-air, a fleeting hesitation that Poirot noted with satisfaction. It was to be a family portrait, Harrow replied, his tone measured. My wife, Lady Harrow, and our lineage a tribute to our place in this county. Dubois was the only artist I trusted to capture its grandeur. And yet, Poirot said, his voice soft but piercing, this portrait is now gone, and Dubois lies dead. You visited him last night, you said, to discuss payment. A man of your stature does not call at dusk for mere financial matters, Nan. Harrow. Blue eyes hardened, though his smile remained. You mistake me, Monsieur Poirot. I valued Dubois' genius. I wished to ensure the portrait met my expectations. I arrived at 8, found him at work, and left by 9. He was in good health. I assure you. Claire Beaumont, seated across from Harrow, toyed with her napkin, her gaze flickering between the patron and Poirot. Victor Crane, lounging with his usual air of disdain, interjected with a dry chuckle. Good health, Sir Reginald. Dubois was half mad with his own brilliance. That portrait was no mere family. Seen it was his weapon, meant to cut deeper than my reviews ever could. Harrow's jaw tightened, but he did not rise to the bait. Poirot, however, seized the moment. Monsieur Crane, you speak of a weapon. What did Dubois intend to reveal? A scandal, perhaps, that threatened Sir Reginald's pride. Crane's smirk widened, though his eyes remained cold. Dubois was a showman, Monsieur Poirot. He loved to hint at secrets, to make his patrons squirm. I suspect he painted something, unflattering, but I never saw it. Poirot turned back to Harrow, his tone deceptively mild. And you, Sir Reginald, did you glimpse this unflattering truth? Or did you, perhaps, ensure it would never be seen? The accusation hung in the air, sharp as a blade. Harrow set down his knife with a deliberate clink. I resent the implication, Monsieur Poirot. I am a man of honor. If Dubois painted something offensive, I would have addressed it through proper channels, not violence. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a counterpoint to the tension. She spoke, her voice gentle yet incisive. Honor is a delicate thing, Sir Reginald. In my village, we've seen how fiercely it's guarded, especially when gossip threatens it. They say Lady Harrow has been away for months. Could the portrait have touched on her absence? Harrow's face reddened, but he maintained his composure. My wife's health required a change of air. Bath suits her better than our damp village. The portrait was to welcome her return, nothing more. Poirot noted the defensiveness, the quick deflection. He sipped his claret, his mind racing. Harrow's pride was not merely personal, it was dynastic, tied to the Harrow name. A portrait that hinted at scandal, perhaps involving Claire Beaumont, would be a direct assault on that pride. Had Dubois, in his artistic fervour, painted a truth too dangerous to display? The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Poirot's attention remained on Harrow. The patron's polished manners could not conceal the occasional glance toward Claire, a look that held both protectiveness and warning. Claire, for her, Part ate sparingly, her eyes downcast, as if afraid to meet Harrow's gaze. Crane, meanwhile, watched them both with the detached amusement of a man who thrived on others' discomfort. As the meal concluded, Poirot proposed a toast. To truth, he said, raising his glass, which, like a fine painting, reveals itself layer by layer. The others joined reluctantly, their glasses clinking with a hollow sound. Poirot watched Harrow's hand tremble slightly, a crack in his otherwise impeccable facade. Later, as the suspects dispersed into the night, Poirot lingered with Miss Marple by the inn's fire. Sir Reginald, he mused, he guards his honour like a fortress, but every fortress has a weakness. The portrait, I believe, was that weakness. Miss Marple nodded, her needles resuming their rhythm. He's a proud man, Monsieur Poirot, but pride can blind. The village whispers of his late-night meetings with Claire, and Lady Harrow's absence is no mere coincidence. Dubois Brush may have painted more than a family, it painted a betrayal. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Mademoiselle Mo. The portrait was a mirror, and Sir Reginald could not bear its reflection. But did he destroy it, or merely hide it? And was the poison meant for Dubois, or was it a desperate act to silence a greater truth? He rose, adjusting his coat with a flourish. Tomorrow we return to the studio. There are clues yet to be found, traces of paint perhaps, or a sign of where the canvas was taken. Sir Reginald's pride may have led him to murder, but it will also lead us to the truth. As the fire crackled, casting shadows on the walls, Poirot felt the familiar thrill of the chase. The patron's pride was a fortress, but Hercule Poirot was a master at finding cracks. The portrait, he knew, was not merely missing knit, was a silent witness to a crime, and he would make it speak. Chapter 5. The critics then on the morning air in St. Mary's Mead carried a crisp edge, as if the village itself held its breath, waiting for the next revelation in the mystery of Julien Dubois' death. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat buttoned, against the chill, made his way to the Rose and Crowns parlour, where he had summoned Victor Crane for a private interview. The inn, with its low ceilings and the faint aroma of freshly baked scones, offered a deceptively cosy setting for what Poirot intended to be a surgical dissection of the critic's motives. Miss Jane Marple, ever present with her knitting, settled into her backed chair by the window, her gentle demeanour masking the acuity of her observations. Victor Crane entered with a swagger, his lean frame draped in a suit that bore the faint creases of neglect. His sharp features, accentuated by a thin moustache, were set in an expression of sardonic amusement, as if the proceedings were a mere diversion from his usual pursuits. He lit a cigarette with deliberate nonchalance, ignoring Poirot's subtle frown at the acrid smoke curling into the air. "Monsieur Crane," Poirot began, his voice precise and measured, "you are a man of words, a critic whose pen has shaped the fortunes of many artists, including Monsieur Dubois. Yet your reviews of his work were, shall we say, less than generous. Tell me, why did you visit his studio on the night of his death?" Crane exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes glinting with defiance. "Curiosity, Monsieur Poirot. Dubois was crowing about this new portrait, claiming it would make fools of his detractors, myself chief among them. I wanted to see if his bravado matched his talent. I arrived around 9, found him half drunk and raving about his masterpiece. The canvas was covered, and he wouldn't unveil it. I left him to his wine and his delusions." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his skepticism. "And you saw nothing to suggest danger? No hint of what this portrait contained?" Crane shrugged, tapping ash into a saucer. Dubois was always theatrical. He spoke of the painting as if it would topple empires. I assumed it was another of his overwrought fantasies. As for danger, the man was his own worst enemy. Too much wine, too much ego. Poirot leaned forward, his green eyes piercing. "You speak of ego, Monsieur Crane, but yours is not insignificant. Your reviews of Dubois were vicious, accusing him of pedestrian sentimentality and gaudy excess. Did you resent his success, or did you fear this portrait would expose something about you?" Crane's smirk faltered, though he quickly recovered. "Expose me? Don't be absurd. I'm a critic, not a subject. My job is to judge, not to be painted. If Dubois thought he could intimidate me with his brush, he was mistaken. I left him alive, Monsieur Poirot, and I didn't touch his precious canvas." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a steady rhythm in the tense silence. She spoke, her voice mild but pointed. "A critic's words can wound deeply, Mr. Crane. In my village, I've seen how a sharp tongue can stir resentment. They say you and Monsieur Dubois had a public quarrel last year at an exhibition in London. He humiliated you, did he not?" Crane's fingers tightened around his cigarette, and his smirk vanished. "A minor spat, nothing more. Dubois took offence at my review and made a scene. He called me a parasite on art, but I've heard worse. I didn't kill him over it, if that's what you're implying." Poirot steepled his fingers, his mind cataloguing the critic's defensiveness. And yet, Monsieur Crane, you visited his studio, knowing his contempt for you. Perhaps you saw an opportunity not to view the portrait, but to ensure it would never be seen. The poison, it was in the wine, Nan. Did you bring it, perhaps, to settle an old score? Crane's laugh was sharp, almost brittle. Poison. I'm a critic, not an assassin. I wouldn't know cyanide from sugar syrup. Besides, I had no reason to kill him. His work was fading. My reviews were merely hastening the inevitable. Poirot's gaze did not waver. You say you left him alive, but the timing, it is curious. Mademoiselle Beaumont departed at 7:30, Sir Reginald at 9. You claim to have arrived at 9, yet the body was found at dawn, already cold. Someone returned to the studio, Monsieur Crane. Was it you? Crane stubbed out his cigarette with unnecessary force. I told you, I left. I was back at my lodgings by 10, as my landlady can confirm. You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot. Miss Marple set her knitting in her lap, her eyes narrowing slightly. The village has a way of noticing things, Mr. Crane. Mrs. Pritchard mentioned seeing a man matching your description near the studio later that night, closer to 11. A critic's curiosity, perhaps, or something else. Crane's face darkened, but he maintained his composure. Mrs. Pritchard must be mistaken. The mist plays tricks, and village gossips love their dramas. I had no reason to linger near that wretched barn. Poirot smiled faintly, a smile that held no warmth. The mist, it conceals, but it also reveals. Monsieur Crane, your words wound, but they also betray. You knew the portrait's power, Dubois, told you it would ruin reputations. Whose? I wonder. Yours, perhaps. Crane rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is nonsense. I've answered your questions. If you want to play detective, look to Harrow or that girl. They had more to lose than I did. As Crane stormed out, Poirot exchanged a glance with Miss Marple. He is angry, Poirot said softly, but anger is a mask for fear. He knows more than he admits. Miss Marple nodded, her needles resuming their dance. He's a bitter man, Monsieur Poirot. A critic thrives on power, but Dubois challenged that power. The portrait, I suspect, wasn't just a painting, it was a gauntlet thrown at Crane's feet. And men like him don't forgive slights easily. Poirot paced the parlour, his polished shoes silent on the rug. The venom of a critic, he mused. It is not just in his words. Crane's presence at the studio was no mere whim. He sought to confront Dubois, perhaps to silence him. But did he use poison, or was he merely a witness to another's crime? He paused by the window, gazing out at the mist-shrouded village. We must verify his alibi, Mademoiselle Marple. The landlady, she may confirm his return at 10, but what of the hours after? And Mrs. Pritchard citing it is a thread we must follow. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. The village will talk. Monsieur Poirot, Mrs. Pritchard's niece, works at the post office, and she's seen Crane sending letters, angry ones, from what I hear. Perhaps they hold a clue. Poirot's lips curved into a smile. You are invaluable, Mademoiselle Marple. The village, it is like a canvas, painted. With whispers, we shall find the truth in its strokes. As the morning gave way to noon, Poirot felt the puzzle tightening. Crane's venom, Harrow's pride, Claire's fear each, was a distinct hue in the mystery of the vanishing portrait. The critic's scorn was a weapon, but whether it had drawn blood remained to be seen. Poirot's little grey cells hummed with anticipation. The truth, he knew, was close, hidden in the shadows of St. Mary's Mead. and he would bring it into the light. Chapter 6. The clue of the canvas. The afternoon sun pierced the persistent mist of St. Mary's Mead, casting long shadows across the village as Hercule Poirot made his way back to Julien Dubois' studio. The converted barn, with its ivy-clad beams and weathered door, stood silent, a sentinel guarding the secrets of its late occupant. Poirot, his walking stick tapping rhythmically against the cobbled path, was accompanied by Constable Hargreaves, whose nervous deference contrasted sharply with Poirot's calm precision. Miss Jane Marple had declined to join them, citing a need to consult the village pulse. But her parting words lingered in Poirot's mind. "The studio holds more than paint, Monsieur Poirot. Look for what was left behind, not just what was taken." Inside, the studio was as Poirot had first seen it, a chaos of creativity frozen in tragedy. Canvases leaned against walls, their vibrant colours dulled by dust and neglect. Brushes lay scattered, and the air still carried the sharp temps of turpentine, now mingled with the faint, lingering bitterness of cyanide. Dubois' body had been removed, but the velvet chair where he had died remained, its cushions bearing the imprint of his final moments. The empty easel stood at the centre, a mute witness to the crime. Poirot's eyes, sharp as a falcon's, swept the room. "The portrait," he murmured. "It was not merely stolen. It was removed with purpose, to conceal a truth. But even in haste, the thief leaves traces, Nan." He approached the easel, his gloved fingers tracing the wooden frame. A faint scratch, barely visible, marked the edge where a canvas might have been cut away. "This was no gentle removal," he said to Hargreaves. "The blade was sharp, the hand hurried." Hargreaves, shifting uncomfortably, gestured to the spilled wine glass, now carefully bagged as evidence. "The coroner confirmed it, Sir Cyanide. In the wine quick-acting, they say. Dubois didn't suffer long." Poirot nodded, his attention drawn to the glass's base, where a faint residue of red paint clung to the crystal. "Curio," he said softly. "The artist paints, he drinks, and he dies. But this paint, why on the glass?" He knelt, examining the floor beneath the easel. A tiny scrap of canvas, no larger than a postage stamp, lay caught in a crack between the floorboards. Poirot retrieved it with a pair of tweezers, holding it to the light. The fragment bore a vibrant streak of crimson, flecked with gold. "This," he declared, "is from the missing portrait." The thief was careless, or perhaps interrupted. Hargreaves peered at the scrap, his brow furrowed. "But what does it tell us, sir? It's just a bit of cloth." Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. "To you, Constable, it is cloth. To Hercule Poirot, it is a whisper of the truth. This crimson, it is distinctive de Boyer, favoured bold colours. But this shade suggests passion, drama. The portrait was no ordinary work." Moving to Dubois' desk, a cluttered affair strewn with sketches and paint tubes, Poirot's attention was drawn to a locked drawer. "Constable," he said, "have you a tool to open this?" Hargreaves produced a small crowbar, and with a reluctant nod from Poirot, forced the lock. Inside lay a single sketch, its edges curling with age. The pencil lines depicted a woman's face strikingly similar to Claire Beaumont, her expression one of defiant allure. Behind her loomed a shadowy figure, its features suggestive of Sir Reginald Harrow, though blurred, as if Dubois had hesitated to commit the likeness to paper. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered, his eyes gleaming. "This is the key. The portrait was not merely a painting, it was a revelation, a scandal captured in oil." He turned to Hargreaves, his voice brisk. "This sketch must be preserved. It is evidence of motive." Hargreaves, still grappling with the significance, ventured, "So, you think the portrait showed Miss Beaumont and Sir Reginald together, and someone killed Dubois to keep it hidden?" Poirot raised a finger, his expression cautionary. "We speculate, Constable, but we do not conclude. The sketch suggests a connection, but whose hand wielded the poison? Sir Reginald, to protect his name; Mademoiselle Beaumont, to escape scandal; or perhaps Monsieur Crane, whose venom may have turned to violence." He moved to the wine bottle on a nearby table, its label smudged but intact. The bottle was half empty, its cork replaced loosely, and its surface bore no fingerprints, a detail that intrigued Poirot. The poison was in the wine, he mused, but the bottle was wiped clean. The killer planned this act, yet left the bottle behind. Why? Hargreaves scratched his head. "Maybe they panicked, sir. Didn't think to take it." Poirot shook his head. "Nan, Constable, panic leaves chaos, but this is calculated. The bottle remains to mislead, to suggest carelessness where there was none." He examined the room further, noting a small pile of ash in the fireplace, barely visible among the charred logs. Kneeling, he sifted through it with a pencil, uncovering a singed corner of paper bearing the edge of a signature Dubois' own. "An attempt to destroy evidence," Poirot said, "but incomplete. The killer was interrupted, or perhaps lacked the time to burn more." Standing, Poirot surveyed the studio once more, his mind assembling the fragments. The crimson canvas scrap, the sketch, the wiped bottle, the burned paper pointed to a crime driven by fear of exposure. The portrait, he said, almost to himself, it was a mirror of truth, reflecting a secret too dangerous to reveal. But where is it now? Hidden, destroyed, or merely misplaced? Hargreaves, eager to assist, gestured to a stack of canvases in the corner. "Should we search?" "These, sir. Maybe it's tucked away among them." Poirot shook his head. "Nan, Constable, the portrait was taken for a reason. It is not here, but its shadow remains. We must follow the clues it has left behind, the paint, the sketch, the ash. They will lead us to the killer." As they left the studio, locking the door behind them, Poirot's thoughts turned to the three suspects. Claire's fear, Sir Reginald's pride, Crane's venom each had a motive, but the sketch pointed most strongly to Harrow and Beaumont. Yet Crane's late-night presence, as whispered by Mrs. Pritchard, could not be ignored. The truth, Poirot knew, lay in the interplay of their secrets, and the studio had given him the first clear stroke of the brush. He paused on the path, glancing back at the barn's silhouette against the fading light, the clue of the canvas. He murmured, "It speaks, but it does not yet confess." "We shall return, Constable, but first we must test the alibis of our suspects. The village, it watches, and it will tell us more." With a final nod to the studio, Poirot set off toward the Rose and Crown, his little grey cells alight with the promise of revelation. The portrait was gone, but its echoes remained, and Hercule Poirot would follow them to the heart of the crime. Chapter 7. The Village Whispers. The twilight hour draped St. Mary's Mead in a hush. The village's quaint lanes, softened by the glow of lamplight spilling from cottage windows. Hercule Poirot sat in Miss Jane Marple's modest parlour, a haven of chintz cushions and polished mahogany, where the air was fragrant with the scent of lavender and freshly brewed tea. Miss Marple, her silver hair neatly pinned, poured from a delicate china pot, her movements precise yet unhurried. Her knitting lay folded on a side table, a silent testament to her ability to weave together the threads of village gossip as deftly as she worked her needles. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice gentle but laced with purpose, "the studio has given you its clues, but the heart of St. Mary's Mead beats in its conversations. The villagers see more than they say, and what they say is often more than they know." Poirot, sipping his tea with a nod of approval, adjusted his moustache. "You are correct, Mademoiselle Marple. The sketch, the canvas scrap, the wiped bottle, they point to a secret, but it is the village that will give it voice. Tell me, what have you heard?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with the quiet satisfaction of one who has spent a lifetime observing the subtleties of human behavior. She settled into her armchair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "The village is abuzz, Monsieur as it always is when tragedy strikes. Mrs. Pritchard, whose cottage overlooks the lane to Dubois' studio, is the chief source. She claims to have seen Mademoiselle Beaumont leaving Harrow Hall on several occasions, well past respectable hours. The most recent was a fortnight ago. At midnight, her cloak pulled tight against the cold." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind revisiting Claire's nervous denials. "Midnight, you say? And Sir Reginald, he was with her?" "Not directly seen," Miss Marple admitted, "but Mrs. Pritchard's niece, who helps at the post office, overheard Sir Reginald speaking sharply to his butler about discretion regarding late-night visitors. And there's more. Lady Harrow's prolonged absence in Bath has not gone unnoticed. The baker's wife, Mrs. Collins, says Lady Harrow left after a heated argument with Sir Reginald, though none know the cause." Poirot leaned forward, his green eyes gleaming. "A quarrel, and then an absence. The portrait, it seems, may have captured more than a family's pride. Perhaps it showed a betrayal, Nan." Miss Marple nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Indeed. And there's the matter of Mr. Crane, the grocer's boy. Young Tommy saw him lingering near the studio late on the night of the murder, closer to 11, as I mentioned before. But there's a new whisper. Mrs. Evans, who keeps the inn, says Crane received a letter from London the day before Dubois' death. She couldn't read the sender, but Crane was agitated, tearing it open in the inn's common room. Poirot's fingers tapped the arm of his chair, a rhythm of calculation. "A letter, you say? This is most interesting. Crane's venom, it may have been stoked by more than professional rivalry, and the portrait Dubois claimed it would ruin reputations. Could it have targeted Crane as well?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her gaze distant. "In my experience, Monsieur Poirot, a man like Crane thrives on control. His reviews wield power, but a painting that mocked him could wound deeper than words. And there's another whisper. Old Mr. Grayson, who tends the churchyard, saw Crane arguing with Dubois at the village fete last summer. Dubois called him a vulture feeding on art's carcass. The crowd laughed, and Crane leapt in a fury." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "The village, it is like a tapestry, each thread a story. This quarrel, it adds weight to Crane's motive. But let us consider the timeline. Claire left the studio at 7:30, Sir Reginald at 9, Crane at 10. Yet Mrs. Pritchard saw Crane near the studio at 11. Someone returned, Mademoiselle Marple, and brought poison with them." Miss Marple's eyes met his, sharp and knowing. "Or perhaps the poison was already there, Monsieur Poirot. The wine bottle, wiped clean, it suggests forethought. Sir Reginald, with his access to wealth and resources, could procure cyanide, but so could Crane with his London connections. And Claire," she paused, her voice softening, a woman in fear might act to protect herself, though I doubt her heart is so cold. Poirot rose, pacing the small parlour with measured steps. The sketch we found, it points to Claire and Sir Reginald Dan affair, perhaps, or the appearance of one. But Crane's presence at 11 intrigues me. Was he a witness, a conspirator, or the killer himself? We must learn more of this letter and of Lady Harrow's absence. The village whispers, but we need facts. Miss Marple set her teacup down, her expression resolute. I shall speak to Mrs. Evans' daughter, who cleans at the inn. She may know more about Crane's letter, and Mrs. Collins' sister-in-law works at Harrow. Holshe might shed light on Lady Harrow's departure. Poirot bowed slightly, his admiration evident. You are a marvel, Mademoiselle Marple. Your village is a web, and you are its most perceptive spider. I shall visit the post office and inquire about Crane's correspondence, and perhaps a word with young Tommy, the grocer's boy, will clarify his sighting. As Poirot donned his hat, preparing to brave the evening chill, Miss Marple's voice stopped him at the door. Be cautious, Monsieur Poirot. The village loves its secrets, but it guards them fiercely. The truth you seek may stir more than whispers. Poirot nodded, his eyes alight with determination. Fear not, Mademoiselle Marple. Hercule Poirot is no stranger to secrets. They are but shadows, and I shall bring them into the light. Stepping into the dusk, Poirot felt the weight of the villagers' gaze. The whispers of St. Mary's Mead were a chorus, each voice adding to the melody of the crime. The portrait, he knew, was the clear canvas that had painted not just faces, but truths too dangerous to endure. With the sketch as his guide and the village as his witness, Poirot would unravel the mystery, one whisper at a time. Chapter 8. The confrontation. The evening shadows lengthened across St. Mary's Mead, cloaking the village in a sombre veil as Hercule Poirot orchestrated a gathering that promised to stir the embers of truth. The studio of Julien Dubois, its air still heavy with the ghosts of turpentine and tragedy, served as the stage for this confrontation. Poirot had summoned Claire Beaumont, Sir Reginald Harrow, and Victor Crane, each unaware of the other's presence until they stepped through the weathered door. Constable Hargreaves stood sentinel by the entrance, his presence a quiet reassurance of order, while Miss Jane Marple, invited at Poirot's insistence, occupied a corner with her knitting, her eyes sharp beneath her serene facade. The studio's interior, bathed in the dim glow of oil lamps, seemed to pulse with tension. The empty easel stood at the centre, a stark reminder of the missing portrait, while the velvet chair, where Dubois had met his end, bore the faint imprint of his final repose. Poirot, his suit impeccable despite the dust of the barn, stood before the easel, his posture commanding yet composed. His green eyes gleamed with the intensity of a man who had glimpsed the pattern of the crime, and now sought to unravel it before those who concealed it. Mesdames et Messieurs, Poirot began, his Belgian accent lending a rhythmic cadence to his words. We stand in the place where Julien Dubois breathed his last, where his masterpiece was torn from its frame. Tonight, I, Hercule Poirot, shall reveal the threads that bind you to this crime. One of you knows more than you have admitted. Perhaps all of you do. He produced the sketch found in Dubois' desk, holding it aloft for all to see. The pencil, lines depicting Claire's defiant visage, and the shadowy figure resembling Sir Reginald, drew a collective gasp. Claire's hand flew to her mouth, her hazel eyes wide with alarm. Sir Reginald's face flushed a deep crimson, his fists clenching at his sides. Victor Crane, leaning against a wall with his usual air of disdain, raised an eyebrow, but his smirk faltered, betraying a flicker of unease. This sketch, Poirot continued, his voice steady, is a shadow of the missing portrait. It suggests a scandal, a truth that Dubois dared to paint. Mademoiselle Beaumont, you claimed ignorance of the portrait's content, yet your likeness is unmistakable. Sir Reginald, you spoke of a family tribute, yet this image hints at something far less noble. And Monsieur Crane, you dismissed Dubois' work, but did you fear it would expose a wound you could not bear? Claire's voice trembled as she spoke, her scarf twisting in her hands. I told you, Monsieur Poirot, I never saw the portrait. Julien was secretive. He wouldn't let me near it. If he painted me like that, I didn't know. Poirot's gaze softened, but his tone remained probing. And yet, mademoiselle, the village whispers of your late-night visits to Harrow Hall, were you and Sir Reginald more than patron and model? Did Dubois capture a truth you wished to hide? Sir Reginald stepped forward, his voice booming with indignation. This is outrageous. I commissioned a portrait to honor my family, not to fuel scandal. If Dubois painted something improper, it was his betrayal, not mine. I had no reason to harm him. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. And yet, Sir Reginald, the portrait is gone, and Dubois is dead. You visited him at 8, you say, to discuss payment. But a man of your stature does not call at dusk for trivialities. Did you see the portrait? Did it threaten your honor? Harrow's jaw tightened, but he held Poirot's gaze. I saw nothing but a covered canvas. Dubois was alive when I left, and I took no painting. Your accusations are baseless, Poirot. Turning to Crane, Poirot's eyes narrowed. And you, Monsieur Crane, arrived at 9, claiming curiosity. Yet Mrs. Pritchard saw you near the studio at 11, long after you said you departed. Did you return to confront Dubois? Did his portrait mock your reputation as he mocked you at the fete? Crane's smirk returned, though it lacked conviction. Village gossips see phantoms in the mist. I left at 10, as I told you. My landlady can confirm it. Dubois painting was no threat to my thrive on controversy, not fear it. Poirot paced before the easel, his movements deliberate. Let us consider the crime. The wine, laced with cyanide, was no accident. The bottle, wiped clean of prints, speaks of premeditation. The portrait, cut from its frame, was taken to conceal a truth, but whose truth? He paused, his gaze sweeping over the trio. Sir Reginald, I propose a theory. The portrait revealed an affaire with Mademoiselle Beaumont. You poisoned Dubois to silence him, then stole the canvas to bury the scandal. Claire gasped, tears springing to her eyes. No, it's not true. I cared for Julien, but there was no affair. Sir Reginald was kind to me, nothing more. I begged Julien to destroy the portrait, but he wouldn't listen. He said it was his greatest work. Harrow's voice thundered. This is slander. My wife is in Bath for her health, and I've done nothing to shame my name. I didn't touch Dubois or his wretched painting. Crane's laugh cut through the tension, sharp and mocking. Come now, Sir Reginald. Your indignation is as staged as Dubois' theatrics. And you, Poirot, little sketch proves nothing. Where's the painting? Without it, you're chasing shadows. Poirot's smile was cold, his eyes unyielding. The painting, Monsieur Crane, is hidden, but its truth is not. The scrap of crimson canvas, The burned paper in the fireplace, these are its echoes. And your presence at 11, it suggests you saw more than you admit. Perhaps you witnessed the theft or committed it. Crane's face darkened, but he said nothing, his silence more telling than his earlier bravado. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a steady rhythm in the charged atmosphere. She spoke, her voice a gentle contrast to Poirot's intensity. Secrets have a way of surfacing, Monsieur Poirot. In my village, we've seen how they fester, driving good people to desperate acts. The portrait, I think, was a mirror none could face. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Exactement, Mademoiselle Marple. The portrait was a weapon, and Dubois' death was its consequence. But who wielded it? We shall know soon, for the truth, it cannot hide from Hercule Poirot. As the suspects were dismissed, their footsteps echoing on the studio's wooden floor, Poirot lingered by the easel, his fingers tracing the scratch where the canvas had been cut. The confrontation, he murmured to Miss Marple, has stirred. The waters, their reactions, Claire's tears, Harrow's fury, Crane's silence, they betray their fears. We are close, Mademoiselle Marple, very close. Miss Marple folded her knitting, her eyes bright with insight. They're protecting something, each in their own way. But the village will talk, Monsieur Poirot, and it will point us to the painting and the killer. Poirot bowed slightly, his resolve unshaken. Tomorrow we search Harrow Hall. The portrait, I suspect, is not far from its patron, and with it we shall find the truth. As they left the studio, the night air was thick with the promise of revelation. The confrontation had laid bare the suspect's defences, and Poirot's little grey cells were poised to strike at the heart of the mystery. Chapter 9. The Hidden Truth. The morning sun rose over St. Mary's Mead with a tentative warmth, its rays struggling to pierce the ever-present mist that clung to the village like a shroud. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat buttoned tightly against the autumn chill, stood before the imposing gates of Harrow Hall, the ancestral seat of Sir Reginald Harrow. The estate, with its sprawling lawns and ivy-covered stone, exuded an air of grandeur tempered by secrets. Constable Hargreaves accompanied him, his face a mixture of awe and apprehension, while Miss Jane Marple had promised to join later, citing a morning errand to listen to the village's pulse. Poirot, however, suspected she was pursuing a lead of her own, one woven from the threads of gossip only she could unravel. The confrontation in the studio had sharpened Poirot's focus. The sketch, with its suggestive depiction of Claire, Beaumont, and a figure resembling Sir Reginald, had ignited a spark of truth, and the suspect's reactions, Claire's tears, Harrow's indignation, Crane's calculated silence had fanned it into a flame. The portrait, Poirot was convinced, was the key to Julien Dubois' murder, and Harrow Hall, the patron's domain, was the most likely place to find it. Sir Reginald greeted them at the hall's grand entrance, his silver hair impeccable, his demeanour a blend of courtesy and barely concealed irritation. Monsieur Poirot, he said, his voice clipped, I trust this intrusion has purpose. My household is in disarray, and I've no patience for baseless accusations. Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. Purpose, Sir Reginald, is my guiding star. The portrait you commissioned is missing, and its absence is tied to Dubois' death. I believe it is here, within these walls, and I request your permission to search. Harrow's eyes narrowed, but he stepped aside, gesturing toward the oak panel. Foyer, search if you must, but you'll find nothing. I've told you I saw no portrait, and I took nothing from that studio. Poirot inclined his head, his politeness masking his skepticism. We shall see, Sir Reginald. The truth, it has a way of revealing itself, even in the grandest of halls. The search began in the library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound volumes and portraits of Harrow ancestors, their stern gazes a testament to the family's pride. Poirot's keen eyes scanned the walls, noting the absence of any work by Dubois. A massive fireplace dominated one end, its hearth cold but bearing traces of recent ash. Constable Poirot said, "Examine the ashes. They may tell a story." Hargreaves, with a nod, sifted through the fireplace, uncovering a singed fragment of canvas, its edge marked by a familiar crimson hue flecked with gold. "It's like the scrap from the studio, sir," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Indeed, the portrait was brought here, perhaps to be destroyed. But why only a fragment? The rest, it is hidden, not burned." They moved the upper floors, where Hargreaves searched guest rooms and servants' quarters, finding nothing but polished furniture and starched linens. Poirot, however, lingered in Sir Reginald's study, a room of dark wood and heavy curtains. A large safe, discreetly set into the wall behind a portrait of Lady Harrow, caught his attention. The painting, a formal depiction of a woman with a distant smile, seemed to watch him with silent reproach. "Sir Reginald," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild, "this safe, it is where you keep your valuables, Nan." "Perhaps the portrait." Harrow's face reddened. "That safe holds family documents, nothing more." "You overstep, Poirot." "Perhaps," Poirot replied, "but with your permission, I shall confirm it." Reluctantly, Harrow provided the combination, his hands trembling slightly as he did so. Poirot opened the safe, revealing a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. With careful precision, he unwrapped it, exposing a slashed canvas, the missing portrait. The painting, though damaged, was unmistakable. Claire Beaumont's likeness stared out, her expression one of bold defiance, her form draped in a gown that suggested intimacy rather than formality. Behind her, Sir Reginald's features were clear, his arm encircling her in a gesture that spoke of more than patronage. The crimson and gold hues matched the studio scrap perfectly, and the slashes made with a frantic hand did not obscure the scandalous truth. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his eyes gleaming. "This is the portrait Dubois died for." A mirror. Of betrayal, Harrow staggered back, his face ashen. I didn't kill him, Poirot. I took the painting, yes, to protect my name. When I saw it that night, I realized Dubois had betrayed me. It wasn't just claret, it was a mockery of my honor, my marriage. I cut it from the frame and brought it here, but I swear Dubois was alive when I left. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting, and the wine, Sir Reginald, the cyanide that ended his life. You brought a bottle to the studio, did you not? Harrow shook his head, his voice hoarse. I brought wine, yes, as a gesture of goodwill. We drank together, but I didn't poison him. Someone else must have tampered with it after I left. Poirot stepped closer, his voice low but piercing. You loved Dubois' work, you say, yet you destroyed his masterpiece. You speak of honor, yet you hid this truth. Why should I believe you did not also wield the poison? Harrow sank into a chair, his hands covering his face. I loved his art, Poirot. I only wanted to protect my family. Lady Harrow, she's frail, and this scandal would destroy her. I took the painting, but I didn't kill him, as Hargreaves bagged the slashed canvas as evidence. Miss Marple arrived, her shawl wrapped tightly against the chill. She took in the scene, her eyes lingering on the painting. A sad truth, Monsieur Poirot, she said softly. a portrait that beautiful, yet so cruel. It drove a man to desperation, but was it enough for murder? Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The portrait is found, Mademoiselle Marple, but the killer remains at large. Sir Reginald's confession explains the theft, but the poison it requires a colder heart. We must revisit the timeline. Claire left at 7:30, Harrow at 9, Crane at 10, yet Crane was seen at 11. Did he return to poison the wine, or was another hand at work? Miss Marple's lips pursed thoughtfully. The village says Sir Reginald's butler, Mr. Wells, was seen buying a bottle of wine the day before the murder. He's loyal, but loyalty can blind. Perhaps he acted to protect his master. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A most excellent point, Mademoiselle Marple. We shall speak to this butler, and we shall test Crane's alibi further. The hidden truth is emerging, but it is not yet complete. As they left Harrow Hall, the slashed portrait carefully secured, Poirot felt the puzzle tightening. The painting had revealed its secret, but the poisoner's identity remained a shadow. With Miss Marple's village wisdom and his own little grey cells, Poirot knew the final truth was within reach. Chapter 10. The final piece. The morning light filtered through the mullioned windows of the Rose and Crown, casting a soft glow over the private parlour where Hercule Poirot sat, his tisane cooling, untouched on the table. The discovery of the slashed portrait at Harrow Hall had brought the mystery of Julien Dubois' death into sharper focus, yet the identity of the poisoner remained elusive. Poirot's little grey cells hummed with the urgency of the chase, piecing together the fragments of evidence: the crimson canvas scrap, the damning sketch, the wiped wine bottle, and now the ruined masterpiece itself. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting resting in her lap, sat opposite him, her eyes bright with the quiet wisdom of one who had unravelled many a village secret. Mademoiselle Marple, Poirot began, his voice precise. The portrait has spoken, revealing a scandal that Sir Reginald sought to bury. But the poison, it was no mere act of passion. It was calculated, deliberate. We must reconstruct the night of the murder, hour by hour, to find the final piece. Miss Marple nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of her shawl. The village has given us much, Monsieur Poirot. The whispers of late-night visits, the butler's purchase of wine, Mr. Crane's lingering presence, they all point to a web of motives. But the truth, I think, lies in who had the most to lose. Poirot steepled his fingers, his mind retracing the timeline. Let us begin. Mademoiselle Beaumont left the studio at 7:30, distressed by Dubois' secrecy, but claiming he was alive. Sir Reginald departed at 9, admitting now to taking the portrait, but denying the poison. Monsieur Crane claims he left at 10, yet Mrs. Pritchard saw him near the studio at 11, and the wine, laced with cyanide, was wiped clean of prince-mark of premeditation. He rose, pacing the parlour with measured steps. The portrait exposed an affair, or the illusion of one, between Claire and Sir Reginald. Harrow's theft was an act of desperation to protect his name, but the poison it required knowledge of Dubois' habits, access to cyanide, and a moment of opportunity. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Sir Reginald's butler, Mr. Wells, bought a bottle of wine the day before the murder. According to Mrs. Collins, a loyal servant might act to shield his master, especially if he believed the portrait threatened the Harrow legacy. But Mr. Crane's presence at 11 is troubling. Why return unless he saw something or did something? Poirot paused, his moustache twitching. Exactement. Let us test these threads. I shall speak to Mr. Wells, and we must verify Crane's alibi with his landlady. But first, let us consider the wine. Sir Reginald brought a bottle to the studio. He says, as a gesture of goodwill. Yet the bottle we found was wiped clean. Did Harrow bring the poison, or was it added later? To this end, Poirot and Miss Marple ventured to Harrow Hall, where Mr. Wells, a stooped man with a face etched by years of service, awaited them in the servants' hall. His demeanour was deferential, but his eyes held a guarded wariness. "Mr. Wells," Poirot said, his tone courteous yet probing, "you purchased a bottle of wine the day before Monsieur Dubois' death. For whom was it intended?" Wells shifted, his hands clasped tightly. "For Sir Reginald, sir, yas, me to procure a fine claret for his visit to the studio. He often shared wine with Monsieur Dubois. Tradition, you might say. And this bottle," Poirot pressed, "you delivered it to Sir Reginald yourself?" "Yes, sir," Wells replied. "I left it in his study that morning. He took it with him that evening." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And did you see the bottle again? Or notice anything unusual? Perhaps a visitor to the hall, or a moment when the wine was unattended?" Wells hesitated, his gaze flickering to the floor. I don't recall, sir. The house was quiet that day. Only Miss Beaumont visited earlier in the week to discuss the portrait." Miss Marple spoke, her voice gentle but incisive. "Mr. Wells, loyalty is a fine thing, but it can blind. If you know something perhaps about Sir Reginald's state of mind, or another who handled that wine, you must tell us." Wells' lips tightened, but he shook his head. "I've told you all I know, ma'am. Sir Reginald was upset about the portrait, but he's no murderer." As they left the hall, Poirot confided to Miss Marple, "Wells protects his master, but his hesitation speaks volumes. The wine was in Harrow's study, accessible to others. We must now test Crane's alibi." At the village lodging house, Mrs. Langley, Crane's landlady, confirmed his return at 10, but her account was vague on the hours after. "He was in his room, I suppose," she said, wiping flour from her hands. "But I'm abed by 11, so I couldn't say if he stayed." Poirot's mind raced as they returned to the inn. The timeline clarified. Claire, distressed, left at 7:30, seeking to persuade Dubois to destroy the portrait. Harrow, at 8, saw the painting, realized its scandalous implications, and took it at 9, leaving Dubois alive but shaken. Crane arrived at 9, argued with Dubois, and left at 10, but returned at 11, as Mrs. Pritchard witnessed. The poison, Poirot deduced, was added after Harrow's departure, likely by Crane or an unseen hand. The final piece, Poirot murmured, is motive. Harrow stole to protect his honour. Claire feared exposure but lacked the means for poison. Crane, however, nursed a grudge his humiliation at the fate, the letter that agitated him. Did he return to silence Dubois, knowing the portrait's power? Miss Marple nodded, her eyes distant. Or perhaps Monsieur Poirot, the butler, acted without Sir Reginald's knowledge, believing he was saving the family. But the letter Crane received it may hold the key. Mrs. Evans' daughter mentioned it was from a London publisher, urging Crane to retract a review. Perhaps Dubois threatened to expose a professional slight. Poirot's smile was one of anticipation. "We are close, Mademoiselle Marple. Tomorrow we confront Crane about this letter, and we press Wells further. The final piece is within our grasp, and Hercule Poirot shall seize it." As the village settled into night, Poirot felt the puzzle nearing completion. The portrait had revealed its truth, but the poisoner's hand was the last stroke to uncover. With the villager's whispers and his own relentless logic, the truth was no longer a shadow, it was a silhouette, sharp and near. Chapter 11. The Confession. The morning mist hung low over St. Mary's Mead, lending an air of solemnity to the village as Hercule Poirot prepared for the final act in the unravelling of Julien Dubois' murder. The Rose and Crown's private parlour, with its familiar chintz, curtains and crackling hearth, served as the setting for what Poirot intended to be a decisive confrontation. The slashed portrait, now in Constable Hargreaves' custody, had revealed its scandalous truth, but the poisoner's identity remained a shadow just beyond reach. Poirot, his suit pristine and his moustache impeccably groomed, sat at the head of the oak table, his green eyes alight with the certainty of revelation. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting set aside for the moment, occupied a chair near the fire, her presence a quiet anchor in the gathering storm. Sir Reginald Harrow, Claire, Beaumont, and Victor Crane had been summoned once more, their faces etched with varying degrees of apprehension. Hargreaves stood by the door, his notebook at the ready, while the slashed portrait, carefully covered, rested on a side table, its presence a silent accusation. Poirot had also requested the attendance of Mr. Wells, Sir Reginald's butler, whose hesitant testimony had hinted at deeper loyalties. The room buzzed with unspoken tension, each suspect aware that the net was tightening. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice a blend of courtesy and command. We stand at the precipice of truth. The portrait found in Sir Reginald's safe has spoken a tale of scandal, of an affair, real or perceived, between Mademoiselle Beaumont and Sir Reginald. But it is the poison, the cyanide in the wine, that ended Dubois' life, and today, I, Hercule Poirot, shall name the hand that wielded it. He turned to Sir Reginald, whose silver hair seemed dulled by the weight of scrutiny. Sir Reginald, you admitted to taking the portrait, cutting it from its frame to protect your honour. You brought wine to the studio, you say, as a gesture of goodwill. But the bottle we found was wiped clean of prints, and the wine was laced with cyanide. Did you, in your desperation, poison Dubois to ensure his silence? Harrow rose, his face flushed with indignation. I've told you, Poirot, I took the painting, yes, but I didn't kill him. The wine was untainted when we shared it. I left him alive at 9, as I've said 100 times. Poirot's gaze shifted to Claire, whose hands trembled as she clutched her scarf. Mademoiselle Beaumont, you visited at 7:30, begging Dubois to destroy the portrait. You feared its revelation, did you not? Did you, perhaps, return later with poison to silence the artist who threatened your reputation? Claire's eyes filled with tears, her voice breaking. No, Monsieur Poirot, I loved Julien, in my way. I left him alive, I swear. I never touched the wine, I don't even drink. I only wanted the painting gone, not him. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, before turning to Victor Crane, who lounged with a forced nonchalance, his sharp features set in a mask of defiance. Monsieur Crane, you claim you left at 10, yet Mrs. Pritchard saw you near the studio. At 11, a letter from a London publisher agitated you the day before a threat to your reputation, perhaps. Did Dubois' portrait mock you, as he did at the fete? Did you return to poison him and ensure his silence? Crane's smirk was thin, his eyes cold. You're grasping, Poirot. I told you I left at 10. Mrs. Pritchard's eyes play tricks. In the mist. As for the letter, it was business, nothing more. Dubois' painting was no threat to me. I'd have welcomed the chance to tear it apart in print. Poirot's attention turned to Mr. Wells, who stood stiffly by the wall, his weathered face pale. Monsieur Wells, you procured the wine for Sir Reginald, left it in his study, where it could have been tampered with. Your loyalty to the Harrow family is unquestioned, but did it drive you to act? Did you poison Dubois to protect your master's name? Wells' hands shook, his voice barely audible. I would never, sir. I bought the wine as instructed. Nothing more. I know nothing of poison. Miss Marple spoke, her voice soft, but cutting through the room's tension. Loyalty can be a heavy burden, Mr. Wells. In my village, I've seen servants act where masters hesitate, believing they serve a greater good. Did you see the portrait, perhaps, and fear its impact on Harrow Hall? Wells' eyes darted to Sir Reginald, a plea for guidance, but he remained silent. Poirot seized the moment, his voice rising with conviction. Let us reconstruct the night. Claire left at 7:30, her pleas ignored. Sir Reginald arrived at 8, saw the portrait, and took it at 9, leaving Dubois alive but shaken. Crane arrived at 9, argued, and left at 10, but returned at 11, as Mrs. Pritchard confirms. The wine, brought by Sir Reginald, was poisoned after his departure, the bottle wiped clean to hide the killer's touch. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. Sir Reginald, your confession to theft is true, but the poison it was not your doing. The motive was yours, but the hand was another's, Monsieur Crane. Your alibi is weak, but your grudge lacks the depth for murder. Mademoiselle Beaumont, your fear was real, but your heart is not cold enough for poison. Poirot turned to Wells, his eyes blazing. But you, Monsieur Wells, you had access to the wine in the study. You knew of the portrait scandal, overheard Sir Reginald's distress. You believed you were saving the Harrow name, did you not? You added cyanide to the bottle before Sir Reginald took it to the studio, expecting Dubois to drink alone later. Wells staggered, his face crumpling. No, I didn't mean. I only wanted to make him ill, to delay the painting's unveiling. The scandal, it would have ruined Sir Reginald, Lady Harrow, the entire family. I used a small dose, I swear, but it was too much. His voice broke into a sob, and he sank to his knees. Sir Reginald stared, his shock genuine. Wells, you fool, I never asked for this. Poirot's voice was stern. Murder, Monsieur Wells, is not a mistake. It is a choice, however misguided. You poisoned the wine, and Dubois paid the price. Hargreaves stepped forward, gently restraining Wells as he wept. Claire buried her face in her hands, while Crane's smirk vanished, replaced by a grim acknowledgement. Miss Marple's eyes met Poirot's, a silent nod of shared understanding. The final piece, Poirot said softly, is placed. The portrait revealed the scandal, but loyalty drove the crime. The truth, it is now complete. As Wells was led away, the parlour fell silent, the weight of revelation settling over the room. Poirot's little grey cells had triumphed, but the victory was tinged with the sorrow of human frailty exposed. Chapter 12. The curtain falls. The fire in Miss Jane Marple's parlour cast a warm glow over the chintz and mahogany, its crackling a soft counterpoint to the sombre mood that had settled over St. Mary's Mead. Hercule Poirot, his tisane cradled in his hands, sat opposite Miss Marple, whose knitting lay idle for once, her eyes reflecting the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle resolved. The village, stirred by the arrest of Mr. Wells, the Harrow family butler, was abuzz with whispers. But here, in this cozy haven, the truth had been laid bare, and the final act of the tragedy was drawing to a close. Mademoiselle Poirot began, his voice low and reflective. The case of the vanishing portrait is concluded, yet it leaves a taste of melancholy. The human heart, it paints its own portrait, does it not? And often it is a canvas of secrets and sorrow. Miss Marple nodded, her silver hair catching the firelight. Indeed, Monsieur Poirot, Julien Dubois sought to capture truth in his art, and it cost him his life. Poor Mr. Wells, driven by loyalty, thought he was protecting his master, but he wove a tragedy instead. Poirot sipped his tisane, his green eyes distant. The portrait was the spark, revealing a scandal that Sir Reginald could not bear. Yet it was Wells, the silent servant, who turned fear into murder. His confession, "I only wanted to make him ill." It is a lament we have heard before, but it does not lessen the crime. He set his cup down, his fingers tracing the rim as he recounted the final pieces. The timeline, it was the key. Claire Beaumont, tormented by the portrait's implications, left at 7:30, her pleas to Dubois unanswered. Sir Reginald, confronted by the painting's truth at 8, stole it by 9, driven by pride but not by poison. Victor Crane, nursing his wounded ego, argued with Dubois at 9 and left at 10, returning at 11 to witness or, perhaps to gloat but not to kill. It was Wells who, in the quiet of Harrow Hall, laced the wine with cyanide, believing a small dose would delay the portrait's unveiling. But cyanide, it is unforgiving. Miss Marple's lips pursed, her voice soft but incisive. The village saw it all in its way. Mrs. Pritchard's eyes, Mrs. Collins' gossip, young Tommy's fleeting glimpse, they pieced together the truth, though they didn't know it. And the portrait, slashed but not destroyed, spoke louder than words. Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. "You are a marvel, Mademoiselle Marple. Your village is a tapestry of observation, each thread a clue. Without your whispers, the truth might have remained hidden. The letter to Crane, the butler's wine purchase, Lady Harrow's absence, they were the strokes that completed the picture." He rose, pacing the small parlour with measured steps. "Sir Reginald, he will bear the weight of scandal, though not of murder. Claire Beaumont, she will carry her shame, but her heart is free of blood. Crane, his venom spent, will write his reviews, but they will lack the sting of before. And Wells, he faces justice, a loyal man undone by his own devotion." Miss Marple folded her hands, her eyes twinkling with quiet wisdom. "It's always the human heart, isn't it, Monsieur Poirot? Dubois painted it, and it led to his end. But your little grey cells, they brought light to the shadows, as they always do." Poirot bowed slightly, his admiration genuine. "And your insight, Mademoiselle Marple, it is the lantern that guides them. Together we have unveiled the truth, and St. Mary's Mead may rest once more." As he donned his hat, preparing to depart for London, Poirot paused at the door, glancing back at the firelit parlour. "The curtain falls," he said softly, "but the stage of human nature, it is never empty. The portrait is gone, but its lesson remains. Truth, it is a dangerous muse." Miss Marple smiled, resuming her knitting. "And yet, Monsieur Poirot, it is a muse worth pursuing. Safe travels, and do visit again. The village always has a story to tell." With a final nod, Poirot stepped into the evening, the mist of St. Mary's Mead curling around him like a whisper of farewell. The case was closed, the portrait's secret laid bare, but the echoes of its truth would linger, a reminder that even in the quietest villages, the human heart paints its own deadly masterpiece.